insane?
This is a sham.
No.
Nope.
Y'all, just
It's
stop.
finally here. Drum roll. Welcome to DBL. I'm Erica Cobb here with Sam, Al, and Tori. And today we're doing things a bit differently because today we're celebrating Juneteenth.
Woohoo!
That's right. That's right. So happy Juneteenth, everyone. Now, Juneteenth is also known as Freedom Day, and today our country will be honoring the emancipation of enslaved Black Americans. Juneteenth was first celebrated in Galveston, Texas on June 19, 1866, and it marked the first anniversary of the day that African Americans in Texas learned of the Emancipation Proclamation, which was issued by President Lincoln in 1863, 3 years earlier. Now, fast forward to today, Juneteenth is recognized as a federal holiday, which was made official last year. So since then, more Americans have been participating in celebrations that some of us was already doing, but there is still some work to be done. So, Al, I just want to start with you because when you think of Juneteenth, one, did you ever think that it would be a national holiday? Did you think it needed to be a national holiday? What are your thoughts?
You know, it's interesting because I remember growing up, you know, calendars that would be in my house. You know, growing up in the 80s in Cleveland, my mom would have calendars that had Juneteenth. And to a young Al, I was like, that's a weird word. That's not a word. What is that? And I'd never learned about Juneteenth ever in school. So I started.
Really?
Ever. No, never. So I started learning about it from obviously my family members. And where I was, maybe it was too cynical. I never thought we'd be having this conversation where we were finally starting to recognize that this important day, not just for Black folks, for the country. I hope people realize like we couldn't move forward where we were. Something had to change, and it had to change immediately. And the fact that we had not celebrated that up until just a few years ago was kind of why there's always been this gray area with our history of like, well, when did it end? We need to give people some understanding about what happened right up until and what happened after, because don't forget, we still dealt with Jim Crow and all those things that were coming, civil rights in the 60s. So there was still a lot of work to be done, but Juneteenth it's a very important day.
Yeah. I think it's important to always hear history. My school is really important about teaching that it's not just the winners, right? It's not always the victories, which is what history is written by. So the Tulsa riots were really important to my school to understand. Very few people know about that. Juneteenth, that was important to understand and celebrate, and as to why. And the whole idea is not having access. Those people didn't know because there was no access to them. So having this conversation right now and giving it that amount of time I'm very, very happy to do so.
I think what really brought it to my forefront was the fact that I would say maybe 10 years ago I learned about Juneteenth, and I'm embarrassed to say that. Maybe 15 years ago, right out of college. And I think, you know, you said you didn't learn about it in your school either, but you learned about it through your ancestors.
Right.
Now, being from a white family, I never had the opportunity to learn about it from my ancestors. So I think that right there is showing that our education system set up then, and even still today, set up now to continue to discriminate, let's be honest, that is should be the precipice of reform, right? I know for Sophie, I want to take Sophie to Juneteenth celebrations. There's a number of them. There's one right by our house in Littleton, and I want her to learn.
Be exposed to that.
To be exposed to it, because I never was. And that's a detriment to society.
It's a lie by omission if you don't mention it really quickly. You mentioned Tulsa when the HBO series The Watchmen was on, and they showed the Tulsa massacre. I had a lot of friends of mine that were Ivy League educated that were asking me, was this part of a cartoon or was this real?
Yeah,
Watchmen
introduced it.
And the reason why, though, Al, because I learned about Juneteenth, I learned about Tulsa, but I also sought it out in African American studies at the university level.
Right.
So it's the information was only there if you were to look for it. But also to all of your points, the idea that there is this disparity of knowledge also contributes to the idea of us being divided and not having learned the same thing, learning the correct education and not revisionist history.
Yeah, what's your history? What's my history?
Yeah, exactly. Well, now that it's a national holiday, many businesses are jumping on board to bring awareness, but a lot of companies, they ain't getting it right, okay? So Juneteenth themed products have been removed from shelves after receiving backlash from shoppers and social media. Now, Walmart is apologizing for Juneteenth themed ice cream. What? I mean, come on, y'all. And get this, they even trademarked it. But Juneteenth themed plates and t-shirts are still available. Now, the Children's Museum of Indianapolis
thank you.
is also apologizing for offering what was labeled as a Juneteenth watermelon salad in their food court.
No.
Are you for real?
Yeah.
Because
Wow.
I don't think it cannot. The museum says we apologize and acknowledge the negative impact that stereotypes have on Black communities. And Dollar Tree tweeted this photo of Juneteenth decorations that they have available, but the post has also received mixed replies.
Yeah, let's get back to that museum. Like, aren't you guys a place where people go to seek history? And again, this is...
Somebody actually printed that label.
Right.
Somebody presented it to their board of directors, got it approved,
it's amazing.
Sent it to a Kinko's or wherever, and got that printed.
I mean, honestly, it's one of those things. You know what's so weird about
$10.
I know. I was thinking that too.
How people like receive the possibility of getting other information, and why diversity and inclusivity is so important is because there was nobody in that room that felt empowered to raise their hand and go, that looks crazy. And the fact that no one felt like that is why there needs to be. Remember, like season 2, we did that story about Dove body soap having that weird
that was
commercial,
5 years ago.
And then there was like the best monkey in the jungle
So
t-shirt.
tone deaf.
Oh, yeah.
It's because I don't think an executive got up that morning and said, I'm going to make a racist t-shirt and sell it on the website. I don't think they knew, and I don't think anybody, because they have the same person around them all the time.
It's the lack of care. It's the lack of care when it doesn't affect you. But let's talk about celebrating Juneteenth by supporting Black-owned businesses.
Let's do that.
Like Creamalicious. Visit blackbusiness.com. That's where you can find more Black-owned businesses. Now, Creamalicious responded to the Juneteenth ice cream situation at Walmart, saying, we are a Black-owned company, Black-owned ice cream company. The appropriate way to support would be to purchase our products.
Right.
So, and there's so many other products. My biggest issue with the apparel and all of the decorations is that there are a lot of Black-owned companies who have been dedicated to these apparel lines, trademarks, all these different things that are now being taken over by big box stores, and the money is not going into Black pockets, and that's a crime.
Right.
On Juneteenth.
Yeah. They're using it as purely marketing, and they're taking away from the community that they're supposedly celebrating.
Right.
So, yeah, shame on them.
Which is like almost like hacktivism in a way. Can I ask you guys a question? Is it okay to say Happy Juneteenth?
That's a great question.
Because I'm going to be honest. It's a celebration in Judaism? Hanukkah's like a celebration of lights, and that's made clear. I just want to say, is that weird or awkward to say?
Is there a Jewish holiday in which you shouldn't say?
Yes, like Yom Kippur. It's the Day of Atonement. So that day is pretty somber, and you don't say that, and that's pretty. People don't know that, so I
full
want to
disclosure.
that,
When we started the show, I wasn't sure about that, but I see it as a positive thing. But I know that so many people were murdered and raped, and leading up to it, it's a negative thing. So I didn't know either. So I'm open to hear either way. But
I personally use Juneteenth as a celebration of unapologetic Black excellence. It's a time for me to also connect with my parents, to hear what they have to say about it, because their perspectives are quite different, based on my father growing up in the Jim Crow South, So it is something that I feel like is celebratory, but it's also an opportunity to have those conversations with our elders.
Absolutely.
Well, coming up on DBL, we've got a Nat Geo explorer whose discoveries reveal more about the challenges Africans faced coming to the Americas. Plus, author Marcellus Reynolds dishes all about his first love, phenomenal Black women.
Closed captioning provided by...
After 4 bloody years, the Union defeated the Confederacy to win the Civil War and abolish slavery in April 1865. There were nearly 4 million slaves in the U.S. at that time. Union armies began marching through the southern states, freeing thousands of slaves each day. The news took months to reach Texas, the westernmost state in the Confederacy. On June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger and 2,000 Union troops rode into Galveston, Texas, and told slaves of their freedom. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. Granger's words spread through Texas. All at once, slaves found out the war was over and they were free. Their joyous, spontaneous celebration gave birth to Juneteenth. Juneteenth, a combination of the words June and 19th, commemorates when the last enslaved people in the South were finally set free. Many slaves were met with violence, even death, when they tried to leave. Yet the promise of freedom extinguished fear and fueled generations of indestructible people. Former slaves gathered on Juneteenth the next year, and the year after that. And over the decades, Black communities observed the holiday with festive family gatherings, colorful parades, and bountiful barbecues. Texas became the first state to make Juneteenth an official holiday in 1980. Since then, 49 states and D.C. also recognize the holiday. In 2021, President Biden signed the bill making June 19th the 11th federal holiday in the United States. Juneteenth is a celebration of independence, the day all Americans were truly free.
Perhaps there's something spiritual that's happening in these oceans. There's a need to lay the ancestors to rest.
3 years ago, she left her job and joined a group of divers searching for shipwrecked slave ships. Now she's taking listeners on a deep ocean voyage to unearth hidden treasures in Black history. Earlier, we spoke with National Geographic explorer Tara Roberts about her eye-opening journey. Take a look.
So your journey starts with a visit to the National Museum of African American History. How did this trip inspire you to become a diver?
Yeah, this was completely accidental. I'm a storyteller by trade, and I just happened to go to the museum. I ended up on the second floor, and I saw this picture on the floor of a group of primarily Black women on a boat in wetsuits. So it intrigued me. And then when I looked to find out who they were and what they were doing, I discovered they were a part of this group called Diving with a Purpose, and that their mission was to help search for and document slave shipwrecks around the world. And I was blown away by that.
Can you share what enslaved Africans experienced on these ships?
I'll say, first of all, I just learned numbers, which I didn't know. Here's some stats for you. There were 36,000 voyages that brought 12.5 million Africans to the Americas. So already that's a huge number that I didn't know. And they estimate that as many as 1,000 of those ships wrecked. But to date, less than 10 have been found.
Wow.
So there's all this history out there to be discovered, which is pretty exciting. What we're doing is less about focusing on that horror and that pain, and it's more about honoring these people whose lives were lost and who've never been mourned. They think that it was about 1.8 million Africans who lost their lives in the Middle Passage. So part of this work is about remembering them and raising their stories up from the depths and back into collective memory.
Your story is unbelievable, and it's just vital for history, but to your point, to honor. Now, in your podcast, Into the Depths, you take your listeners on a journey with you back to Africa.
The podcast it's a 6-part narrative series that follows me not only to Africa, but to Latin America, to the Caribbean, and around the U.S. Wow. These are all the places where these wrecks are. And we tell stories about the ships. So there's some really kind of incredible wrecking events. So we detail some of that. We talk about the people who were on the ships. We talk about the divers and the communities that are involved in this work and trying to help bring that back into memory. And then we talk about my experience.
Throughout all your research and trying to find some answers, you were moved to tears in this process, which everyone can understand on this panel. Can you tell me about some of those moments?
Yeah, there was one moment when I went to Benin, which is a country in West Africa, and I really wanted to find out what the journey was like before these captive Africans were put on the boats. So I walked the slave trail in Benin, and I stood at a barracoon. Barracoons are the places where they held captive Africans. And I stood on the beach at a door of no return and looked back. And there was, there are really no words for the feeling that I had in imagining what it was like for these captive Africans to look back at their home place and know that they may never see it again. So that was pretty hard to see that.
You are currently on the cover of National Geographic. So besides just the obvious, what makes that special for you?
Well, it's crazy.
Yes, I'm sure you just are in your car sometimes this is crazy.
It's crazy. I think what I learned is that I'm the first Black woman explorer to be on the cover. And that's crazy. I grew up reading National Geographic, dreaming of being able to tell stories like that, and realizing that most of the people who were telling those stories didn't look like me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tara. You are fascinating, phenomenal, amazing Black woman that we are happy to celebrate. DBL Nation, the Into the Depths podcast is now available on Apple Podcasts and all other podcast websites. Thank you, Tara. We'll be right back.
Thank you so much. Great.
Thank you.
Home prices and rents continue to rise, but the federal minimum wage hasn't changed since 2009. One viral tweet claimed, quote, "The average rent in the U.S. hit a new record high of $1,827 last month. On the federal minimum wage of $7.25, people take home $1,256 a month." Let's verify. Has typical rent in America exceeded the income earned on federal minimum wage? Our sources, the Department of Labor, and 3 real estate sites that produce research on rent prices. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 per hour. So let's calculate monthly income. On a 40-hour work week, if you worked 52 weeks a year, that comes out to $1,256 per month, just like the tweet claimed. Now, of course, some states have minimum wages higher than that, but we'll come back to that. The tweet says the average rent in America is $1,827 per month. That number comes from Realtor.com's April estimate of median rent. It's based off units advertised on the site in the top 50 metro areas and only includes studio, 1-bedroom, and 2-bedroom apartments. Redfin does a similar estimate based on listed units of all sizes. Its number for April was $1,962 per month. And Zillow's estimate actually tries to account for all rents, not just new listings. Their national typical rent number, $1,927 per month. All of those rent estimates are significantly higher than the $1,256 per month you can make on federal minimum wage. That means we can verify that the tweet is truthful when it claims typical rent has exceeded the income earned on the federal minimum wage. So what wage would you have to make to afford typical rent in the U.S.? Using Zillow's 1927 estimate, you need to make $11.22 per hour. And that's just to make rent. It doesn't account for taxes or other living costs. 16 states plus D.C. have minimum wages that high, but the cost of rent in those states may be higher than the national estimates. With your Verify, I'm Casey Decker.
From Hattie McDaniel to Regina King, the countless Black women who revolutionized Hollywood deserve our attention. Earlier, we got to chat with Marcellus Reynolds, whose new book, Supreme Actresses, celebrates them all. Take a look.
Put your hands together for author Marcellus Reynolds. Hi. First of all, your book is gorgeous. I was just telling Erica Cobb over here that every single person needs to have this on their coffee table because it's a showstopper. Yeah. And the interviews are incredible.
Very much so. Very much so. Yes, it's a beautiful book, Marcellus. How are you, my friend? My first question. I'm good. Good to see you. Good to see you. Why did you choose to write specifically about Black women in Hollywood in this book?
I wrote about what I know, Jeff. I wrote about my first love, right? You know, my mother, my grandmother, those were the women that raised me, that created me, that loved me, that nurtured me. And I also wrote about actors and acting as part of the craft. And specifically with this book, I wrote about Black women because they don't get the kind of love maybe and the kind of respect that their white peers get in Hollywood. And I didn't want some of these women to be lost to history. You know what I mean? There's a whole generation of people who may not know who Dorothy Dandridge or Josephine Baker are.
Bless you. I am here for it. Let me talk about my spirit goddess, Gabrielle Union, because she wrote the foreword to Supreme Actresses. So what stood out to you?
The thing I love best, well, first and foremost, that foreword is fire. It is like a call to arms for Hollywood. She snatched Hollywood all the way up. You know, she told all the truth. And I love how she examines this idea of onlyness. Like so often when Black people become successful, they're the only person in the room that's the person of color. And I loved how she sort of broke that down and made it applicable to everyone.
Right.
And I also love this idea that she really expanded upon about Black sisterhood, about it not being a competition, about how if she doesn't get a part, she's happy for the other person that gets a part, because what she hopes is that that creates another opportunity and another opportunity, another door opens.
You know, and she walks it like she talks it, because I got to tell you, I have reached out to her a couple times. She has absolutely given me the best advice. I mean, she is for real like one of the best people I have ever been able to be encountered with.
Everything. Everything.
And I have to say that picture of her looking down says everything you just said, Marcellus, in a way visually that was lovely. Of the actresses featured in the book, did someone surprise you? Whose story impacted you the most?
Dorothy Dandridge. I think that's like a morality tale for all time. This was the first Black woman to receive a Best Actress Oscar nomination, the first Black woman to present an Oscar at an Oscar award ceremony. She's one of the most famous women. She's also the first Black woman to appear on the cover of Life magazine. She dies alone in a hotel room with less than $100 in her bank account. And I think for me, that's like a morality tale, how you can fly so high and almost touch the sky and then fall to earth. And I just think that's profoundly sad.
It is. It's tragic. It's unjust. Marcellus, I wish we had more time with you. We're going to have you on this panel. And I told Erica, like, I think Erica needs to be in one of your books.
Yes, Erica. Let's talk about it.
First of all, Sam, that was super dope. Thank you. Marcellus, don't feel any type of way. I understand.
Volume 2.
That's amazing.
Marcellus, we adore you. Thank you so much for talking with us. And please, to our viewers, you gotta get a copy of Supreme Actresses, Iconic Black Women Who Revolutionized Hollywood at any bookstore. It's so heavy, too.
I like a heavy, good coffee table book.
We'll be right back. Thank you so much, Marcellus. We love you.
Thanks, buddy.
Bye.
Promotional consideration is brought to you by...
Do you need some good news in your life? A little sunshine to brighten up those cloudy gray days? Well, then do I have a story for you. One day, a few New York doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center had an idea, and they wanted to organize an experimental study. Now, the funding they received was so teeny tiny that the study only included 12 patients, and they were all recently diagnosed with colorectal cancer, which is the second most common cause of cancer deaths in the U.S. this year. All 12 of them were in stage 2 or 3 of the disease. All 12 had yet to try chemo or surgery, and the cancer they did have had not yet spread to other organs. It's also super important to note that all 12 had tumors with a specific genetic mutation. It's called mismatch repair deficiency, or MMRD tumors. These guys are quite resistant to chemo and radiation. The experiment rested on a drug called dostarlimab. Doctors have used it before to treat other cancers, but never rectal cancer. This drug is a type of drug called an immune checkpoint inhibitor. And instead of going ahead and killing the cancer cells itself, This drug, this little nifty little guy, he goes into the body, he identifies and unmasks cancer cells Scooby-Doo style, and then binds to it and helps the body's own immune system attack those cells efficiently. So the 12 patients, they received an infusion of dostarlimab once every 3 weeks for 6 months. This treatment, and this is super important, was supposed to be followed up with chemotherapy and surgery for the participants. But let me tell you something amazing. Not one of the 12 patients needed it. 6 months after beginning the drug, all 12 were in complete remission, with nary a tumor being detected from any of them. And not one patient relapsed during the follow-up period, which was up to 2 years. Best of all, the 12 who were preparing for these life-changing procedures, if this didn't work, had virtually zero complications or side effects. You just don't hear this. 100% rate of cancer remission, it's unheard of. Quote, "I believe this is the first time this has happened in the history of cancer," said medical oncologist Louis Diaz Jr. The co-author of the paper, Dr. Andrea Sersic, added the experiment resulted in, quote, "a lot of happy tears." Now, the British pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline will be expanding the budget and the study to include more patients and to see if the results can be replicated. But it does offer us a light at the end of a very, very long tunnel. Now you know.
We know sunscreen is essential to cut the risk of skin cancer, reducing wrinkles, and even slowing the effects of aging. But a new report from the Environmental Working Group says about 75% of sunscreens on the market have inferior protection. It comes after several studies found some sunscreens contain the chemicals oxybenzone and octinazate, and they've been linked to hormone issues and shorter pregnancies. More research is needed, and the FDA has asked manufacturers to test more. But so far, the agency has allowed products containing the chemicals to stay on the market. So what is safe to use? Turns out, old-fashioned zinc oxide. You know, the stuff that leaves you with a white nose? It acts as a physical barrier to the sun instead of being absorbed into your skin like chemical sunscreens. And that's connecting the dots.
Welcome back to DBL. We love sharing your comments, so let's get to them. Tina wrote in saying, Tara's story is powerful because there's been a stereotype that black people don't swim.
Oh, that's true.
This should prove that some of us don't just swim, we deep dive.
Ooh.
Hey, okay.
That's good.
Yeah. Now Kyle says Marcellus has such a contagious energy. That's Sam's buddy. Okay. Now I'm a new buddy.
Yeah, you are.
And I'm totally getting that book. I need to see more pictures. You absolutely do. It's so well done.
Dude, he's
please.
go ahead.
No, you know.
He is someone that when he walks in a room, you want to hang out with him, and he makes you feel seen and heard. And I think it's always been his purpose to shine a light on everyone around him, but specifically black women.
I love it. I have it on my coffee table.
Yeah,
Everybody knows about my ottoman. Al makes fun of it.
The ottoman.
Every day. We'll see you again soon.
Bye, guys.